To day 4 of designing and implementing high leverage instructional practices, use of data to inform instruction with Dr. George Bash. I'm Lauren Lutz, an educational consultant with the Patton West office. I'm one of your facilitators this morning. We also have Tara Russo on the chat, and I believe Elaine Neugebauer should be here to close us out today. And if not, there are several Patton people here that can help you should you need help. If you need closed captioning today, can you please click on the CC button? The transcript should then be visible. My colleagues and I will be monitoring the chat for any questions or technological needs that you have. I know that Tara will be putting in a lot of links that you'll need today, but please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any needs. And really quick before we get started and I turn things over to Dr. Bash, if you could please right now rename yourself, that would be very helpful. If right now your screen name, for example, Andrea Zern, you're perfectly fine. You just need first name, last name. But if you're joining us from something like iPhone or my laptop, or it's your first initial and your last name, if you could rename yourself, if you hover your hand over your picture right now, like your face or your little square on the screen, there's 3 dots. You'd click on those 3 dots, and then the last option in the pull down menu is rename. So if you wouldn't mind renaming yourself first name, last name, that would be fantastic. And then also, if you or one person from your school district could enter into the chat the name of the school that you're joining us from, that would be fantastic, so that we could see who we have in our audience today. All right. And as those roll in, if you could continue entering those just so that Tara and I know who all is here, that would be great. I will roll this over to Dr. Bash. It's my pleasure to welcome you again to Patton virtually, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. It's good to maybe see you, but at least hear you today, and I'm looking forward to our time together. Hold on here a second and let me get my screen shared. Hold on one second. Get this up here. So can you see that, Lauren? Okay.
Right now we can see you're not in presentation. There you are. Now we can see.
There we go. All right. Sounds awesome. Well, good morning, everyone, again. And I'm looking forward to today. I think today is going to be interesting. We have some objectives, and I'm not going to read, I'm trying not to read slides to you. So there are 3 or 4 basic takeaways from today. One of the challenges to using data to inform instruction is, how do we know if the student improvement has been significant enough to be able to move this student or group of students closer to grade level standards? I think all of you have been using data long enough to know that an arithmetic improvement may or may not be significant. So one of the takeaways today, and a question that I'll ask you in the polls, and we're going to have breakout rooms and time to discuss this, is in your school or district, what are your guidelines for differentiating just increase in raw score or improvement to significant improvement, where this student is actually moving closer to grade level or subject area standards? That's the first question. The second takeaway for today is going to be, if you now have criteria for different levels of improvement, how do you use that, what I call decision rule to trigger instructional decisions? So for example, if a student is improving arithmetically but not lowering a level of risk, what are the guidelines for what we do instructionally? So that's the second thing that I want you to think about as a takeaway for today. So we're going to have questions about, do you have these two different kind of decision rules around the data and around the instruction? Second, do you have protocols to guide teams to use those rules to modify, inform, make instructional decisions? And then the third thing that I'm going to ask you to think about as a takeaway for today is, let's say that you do have to make instructional changes. How do you do that? What are the guidelines, protocols for how we look at data and translate that data into instructional changes? Now, one of my frustrations, from whether it was when I was a building principal, a district administrator, what have you, is how do we get consistency in the use, interpretation, and translation of that data to instructional action across buildings, across schools, sites? And how, for the patent people on here, is how do you facilitate making those decision rules, facilitate the development of the protocols, and facilitate the professional learning that will result in consistent behavior by the educational professionals that you work with? So these three big things today: the decision rules for data, the decision rules for instruction, and then how do we make those instructional changes? Now, the first part of today, we're going to go through being sure we all have background knowledge and how to do this. The second part of our presentation today is going to be translation from knowledge to skill. I have three different activities that we're going to do. The first activity is going to be, I'm going to guide you through a protocol with a data set. We're going to call that guided practice. The second one is, I'm going to give you a protocol with a different data set, put you into breakout room and see if you can use the guided and be successful with the independent worksheet. You didn't know you're going to have to do work today. You thought you just getting your hot cup of coffee and kicking back and doing this. The third one is work. Now, the first two are going to be group data. So that if you're a member of a school leadership team, the question is, how are the kids in our school doing? How are the kids in our grade doing? I'm going to give you a guidance on taking a look at disaggregating data. One of the examples I have is, how are kids with disabilities doing compared to kids without disabilities, right? We're going to move into, then hopefully we'll have time to move into an individual student worksheet. And we'll see how to translate raw data into those decision rules. So hopefully those are the things today that you signed up for. If not, you can put the whole thing on mute and start, searching Amazon or something. I'm going to back up here. So your materials for today, you have 5 things. You have guided worksheet, you have independent worksheet, and then you have an individual student practice sheet. In addition, you also will have a data set to work with for your individual student. I have given you the data for the guided and the independent. And then at the end, there's a document for you to download, a multiple page document on how do you organize your thinking when you are going to change the type of instruction. So those are your materials for today. If I reference anything that I haven't given you that you would like, please just let me know. And I've got a handy paper and pencil here, and I will get it to you. And I will also try to I'm going to turn on my chat box here so that you can, whoops, hold on. I'm going to move my chat box over here. And that way, if somebody puts something in the chat box, I will, I'm just looking at it to be sure I haven't missed anything so far. Awesome. Okay, so let's start out with some mindsets for decision making here. So for our work today and for our work with data, growth is the metric for decision making. That is the mindset. One of the things I'm going to ask you in a poll shortly is, what degree do you think growth is the mindset for instructional decision making? We have two types of data. You know this. I'm not going to. I'll just make a few comments. There's the discrepancy data between where teachers or buildings want a kid to be and where the kid is. That discrepancy generally is what triggers concerns. However, discrepancy cannot be used to measure the impact of instruction, not in any kind of short term. And if you're going to be making modifications whether you're either modifying what you're doing in tier 1, whether you have groups of kids that you're trying to accelerate in tier 2, or you're working intensively with a few kids in tier 3, you need to know whether or not what you're doing is changing the rate of growth, because only the rate of growth can predict if a student is going to be moving toward standards. So the mindset for this work is growth. The technology for this set, for the work today, is having a database and data organization. Hopefully we're way past the point, although I know it's not the case. We're way past the point where individual teachers or individual teams are having to figure out how to organize their data and how to put their data into a system where they don't have to work with the data. They just have to look at it and know exactly what it means. So I'm going to give you some examples of that today. Policy. We need a district policy on decision rules for the levels of growth. We're going to go through that explicitly today and what that would look like. We also need policy on decision rules for instructional actions based on levels of growth. So the policy would be when we're making decisions based upon our district data system, here's what defines different types of growth. There are 3. And then based upon that type of growth, here is the framework for what the instructional decision-making has to consider. And we need protocols to guide that process of implementing the decision rules. So policy, and the policy is kind of like the curriculum, and the protocols, it's like what we're going to do. And the protocols is how we're going to do it. So it's just like curriculum and instruction. And then professional learning. Based upon the policy and the protocols, how do we ensure that everybody implements this database decision-making consistently? We don't want where a kid goes to school to influence whether or not there are good database decisions about instructional improvement for that student or growth for that student. We want every school to have the same type of policy and protocol implementation. So there's a professional learning thing that will have to happen here as well. And please be sure to put any questions or comments in the chat box. The chat box is going to be our first way of interaction. Our second way of interaction is going to be audience polls. And our third way of interaction is going to be breakout rooms. So hopefully everybody will be able to stay engaged. Some quick background about growth. Growth is based on academic engaged time. Academic engaged time is the best predictor of student growth. Academic engaged time is the amount of time students are exposed to high quality instruction. Time is the first, and you remember this, time is the first variable that differentiates the tiers in a multi-tiered system of supports. The least amount of time is tier 1. Take, for example, ELA, 90 minutes a day. High school might be whatever your schedule is blocked at. Tier 2 is tier 1 plus additional academic engaged time. Tier 3 is even more time. The higher the tier, the more the time. very quickly, just reviewing, you can't accelerate student growth for students who are behind simply by differentiating instruction. Not when academic engaged time predicts student growth. Remember, all of those kids in tier 1 are getting academic engaged time. So the math here is that students who are behind, in order to narrow that gap, the entry level decision for instruction, we'll talk about this later, is how are we going to get this student more time? We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So this concept of academic engaged time is critical to database decision making. If we don't have the time for instruction, or we don't have the ability to look at the things that threaten time, then we're not going to be successful with the students. So some fundamental principles in case you want to use this as you move forward in whatever your leadership capacity is in your school or district. Academic engaged time predicts student growth better than any other variable, period. Holding all those other variables constant, the more time a student has, the faster that student will grow. Student engagement right now is something we're all struggling with. And during COVID, student engagement was, kids were at a huge risk for not being engaged. Time and growth are inextricably related. More time, more growth. Less time, less growth. So anything that threatens adequate academic engaged time becomes a barrier to the delivery of effective instruction and the rate of student growth. So roughly, you can figure it out for your school or district. This is the academic engaged time that you have to work with. Minutes are finite. Loss of minutes is loss of achievement. The problem here is that some students have lots of opportunity for additional engaged time after the school day. Enrichment, that could be community, it could be home, it could be family, it could be a lot of things. Some students, the only academic engaged time they have is what's available in school. So we start off by thinking about the school first. So behaviors that result in loss of academic engaged time. Number one is insufficient instructional time. We have to be very careful with our students that are struggling, that we don't have them pulled out for so many different supplemental services that actually their instructional time is lost because we're moving them around. School schedules determine whether or not there's sufficient instructional time. If school schedules don't permit tier 2 and tier 3 opportunities for students, then we have a problem. Attendance and tardiness. I don't think I have it here. I did not include it, but I'm going to send you a few things about attendance, the impact of attendance on instruction all the way from kindergarten through high school. I'm just making a note to myself. And you can use that as evidence of the relationship between attendance, academic engaged time, and student performance. Referrals to the office are huge. Health referrals. We know that referrals to the office basically are due to externalizing behavior types of things. Health referrals are more likely to be due to internalizing types of things. We've talked about that before. Student off task. In a classroom, the student shows up every day, but is not engaged. Suspensions. All of these things that you see here, plus you can add the other ones for you, have to be viewed as threats to academic engaged time. Those threats have to be mitigated before effective instruction can take hold. If students are not present, I don't care how good the instruction is, it's not going to improve student outcomes. So the first thing we always look at here in database decision making is time a robust resource for us. The other thing I want you to think about, and you can have some discussions here. The other thing I want you to think about is what metric, what data element you're using that is instructionally related. So for example, are you looking at the number of days missed, the number of referrals to the office? Those are not helpful because we don't have the capacity to move that into an instructionally relevant data element. So if a student has missed 3 days, that's the equivalent of over 1,000 minutes. I think it's 1,050 minutes of instruction. If a student is tardy, that's loss of instruction. Referrals to the office. Every school should have a good estimate of how long a referral to the office removes a student from academic engaged time. What we know from the research is when you utilize time as the metric for behavior that threatens academic engaged time, we see an incredibly strong relationship between time and student academic progress. Now, if we weren't just focusing on day-to-day, I would be delving into this deeper, but I am going to send you a couple of resources that are shocking if you want to know the truth. They're absolutely shocking about what happens to student performance, and the data I have will cut across racial, socioeconomic, students with disabilities, loss of time versus what happens to their growth when that time has been replaced. And I'm looking here, Anna, we have truancy concerns, and that is crazy. 1,000 minutes lost. Well, not 1,000 minutes a day. It's 350 minutes a day. 3 days would be 1,000 minutes of loss for instruction. And we also know, for example, particularly at the elementary and maybe the middle school level, that the first 2 days of the week is the worst time to be absent or truant because that's when new material is typically introduced. And Becky, we have a few principal concerns that PBS activities interfere with absolutely. Well, it's not the PBS activities as much as it is the failure of those activities to keep students engaged. So if you have tier 1 school-wide PBIS, that should basically be integrated into instruction. Also, I think at some other point in our series, and I'll refer you back and I'll send this reference to you again. Hold on here, I'm making a note. Kathleen Lane's work around behavior supports integrated into the delivery of instruction. Anything about PBIS that's preventative is not going to threaten academic engaged time. But anything about that where a student does not respond to the engagement strategies or the student, there's some kind of code of conduct action, then yes. But typically PBIS activities should not be separate. The tier 1 is basically climate. It's the way teachers interact with students, be safe, be respectful, etc. And let me just say this very quickly. I don't want to get too far off task here, but the question that is being asked here is important. PBIS activity should not be something that's separate from instruction. It's got to be integrated. If we're stopping instruction to do some PBIS thing, then that, in my opinion, is probably not PBIS being implemented, particularly in tier 1, the way that it's supposed to be implemented. So that's, you know me well enough, hopefully. I've been hanging around Pennsylvania for a number of years now, that academics and behavior have to be integrated. We can't have a behavior team and an academic team because then everybody's fighting for time to do their stuff. The most important thing in school is keeping students engaged in high quality instruction. I also have talked to you earlier this fall about the fact that high quality instruction is the first protective factor for behavior and social emotional wellness. So it's got to be integrated. Let me see here, hold on. I don't know, Becky and Anna, if that's helpful or not. And one other question, got it. I should know that for calculating percentages in IEPs, because it's based upon 1,800 minutes a week. Yeah, just figure out what your actual school week is. That's important. The other thing, Anna and Becky, you can quote me on this, Becky. You can just don't give anybody my phone number. I just want to remind us that we talked about this earlier in the fall, but this is a good reminder. Remember that when you're doing an IEP and you're putting down the minutes of specially designed instruction, that is instruction that is evidence-based for students with that type of disability, whether it's reading, we talked about strategy-based instruction, we talked about collaborative strategic reading, we talked about strategic and SIM, the strategic instruction model. If gen ed teachers are utilizing specially designed instruction, so if they're doing collaborative strategic reading, they are doing specially designed instruction for a kid who's included. You would want to reflect on the IEP that for that ELA activity, that the student would be getting the number of minutes of instruction from both general ed that's using SDI, as well as whatever the special ed teacher is doing with that student. So if a gen ed teacher is using collaborative strategic reading, let's say in middle school for teaching comprehension, and that's done at 60 minutes a day. And in addition, that the special ed teacher is working with the student 30 minutes a day, and I'm just making that up. You have 60 minutes times 5, that's 300. And you have 30 minutes times 5, that's 150. So you actually have 450 minutes of a student being exposed to specially designed instruction. So what goes in that IEP is the number of minutes of specially designed instruction, not just instruction given by a special ed teacher or something like that. Okay, moving ahead. So here's the first reflection. And we're going to have an audience poll on them. Given our discussion of the importance of understanding academic engaged time, how is this concept understood in your setting in the context of its influence on student rate of growth, interpretation of data, and instructional decisions? So this conversation we've been having in the chat box and what have you so far here, is that the kind of conversation that's going on in your school or in your district? So just I'm going to give you a minute or two to reflect on that. Maybe think about, who is facilitating this conversation. Does it occur? Does it occur in SST meetings? Whatever. Just think about it for about a minute, and then I'm going to ask you to do a poll. Okay, if we can put the first audience poll up here, that would be awesome.
I'm hoping everybody sees that.
I see it.
Okay, great.
So if you, based upon your reflection, if you're there as a team, make this a team answer. If you're an individual, obviously, you should have good inter-rater agreement if you're talking to yourself, unless you have some distractions today. So can we see if, as the poll is populating?
I have to end the poll for you to see the final results.
Oh, okay.
I
That's
don't know.
fine.
I know that we have several patent people on board today, so I'm not sure at what % you'd like me to stop it. Right now, we're 25 out of 33 people have responded. Oh, Tara says yes, we could see the results. So great. Good.
However we do that, that's great.
Okay.
Sometimes you can see it populating.
Okay.
So where are you now in the number of people?
81%. We have 27.
That's good.
33. Is that good?
That's perfect. Let's see the
Okay.
results.
I'm going to end the poll and you should be able to see the results right now.
Okay.
Yes, you could see those.
All right,
Great.
37, 67, perfect. Nobody strongly disagrees. Wow, that's awesome. The coffee must be working this morning. The caffeine is working. Nobody is edgy. So yeah, as we look at data and as we look at instructional decisions, this growth mindset really has to, and academic engaged time, which is the metric for growth. That's a conversation that hopefully you'll take back and into some of your breakout rooms today. So what we're looking at is basically 67% of the people are saying don't know or disagree. I'm really happy, to be honest with you, to see the 33% that is agree and strongly disagree. I, as you know, I do some of this stuff elsewhere as well. And that number is slowly increasing. It's slowly increasing. And I'm just going to say one more thing and then we'll move on. We spend so much time in meetings, particularly on individual kids or for tier 2 stuff, about deciding what the instruction should be. What is evidence-based instruction for this situation, for the demographics of the student, etc. But the biggest barrier to implementing that is we don't have the time to do it. So you have to deal with time first. You never want to implement instruction in a situation where you don't have that time frame to do it right. That's the biggest threat to fidelity. So we have to manage time first, always. Okay, thank you for participating in that poll. Now, let's get a little bit deeper dive here into rate of growth issues very quickly. So the rate of growth answers a question: where's the student now, or group of students? Where are the students supposed to be? What's the gap? And then this becomes critical: is how much time do we have to close the gap? So you take the amount of growth that's necessary, you divide it by the amount of time you have, and that gives you the rate of growth necessary to move that student toward standards. And that sometimes, matter of fact, I'm going to say most of the time, is shocking. Because you look at that and you go, we can't do this. It's too much. So that's one of the reasons why back in 2015 or 2016, the US Department of Education around IEPs basically said it's the responsibility of the IEP team to identify, based upon the rate of growth that a student is making, to identify when that student is going to come close to grade level standards. That guidance acknowledged that for most students with disabilities, and we can also translate that for students without disabilities who are way far behind, that time is likely to be multiple years. So one of the things, and I'm just saying kids with IEPs because this is technically required, right? Is at the end of every year, you have to indicate how much that gap is closed and project based upon that rate of growth when the student is going to come in line with grade level or subject area standards. And if that rate of growth is not working, then that's when you have a deeper dive into, we need to look at the instruction. And we need to increase this rate of growth, or the student is either not going to graduate or graduate certainly not at anywhere near grade level or subject area standards. So that's what today is about, is how do we do this, right? And I'm on my screen, you know, you've done Zooms before. It's really hard to keep track of your screen and the chat because I really do. Good. Okay, perfect. That was nothing else. All right, so let's just, this is just some basic stuff. Slower rates of growth are okay if you have a lot of time, meaning that two things there. One, the student is young. and you got a lot of instructional time moving forward with all the time you're going to be in school. Or the other is that you have carved out sufficient instructional time to give, more intensive instruction. Generally, the shorter the time, the shorter the time available, a higher rate of growth needs to close the desired gap. So the longer you wait to do something, the harder it's going to be to do it. Make the decision early. That is why the data are pretty strong that once a student is more than 2 years behind in elementary, there's about a 10% chance the student's ever going to catch up based upon the way things are being done now. So as a building principal, as part of it, we didn't call it that, but as part of an early warning system, we wanted to know the minute. For us, a critical gap was half a year. Once a student was half a year behind, it was all hands on deck. Because once we got past a year behind, now we are in dangerous territory trying to catch that student back up. So food for thought here is particularly for elementary. I'll give you a high school example in a moment. Particularly for elementary, what are your criteria for all hands on deck based upon a student being behind? Particularly in kindergarten. I mean, everybody, we hope by the end of kindergarten. Remember, hope is not a strategy. It's a good emotion to motivate people, but it's not going to do anything for the kid. So what are your criteria for what becomes critical behindedness? At the high school level, for all kids who are likely instructionally at risk, we want to use those electronic grade books to identify student rate of growth. And the first 4.5 weeks of a semester of the beginning of the year, which is 1/2 of a report card period of 9 weeks, we want to identify all those students who are already at risk. So just some guidelines there. So I'm going to just show you this example. This is just for us to get common background here, little test. And I've done this with you before, but it's good to refresh here today because it's the business we're doing today. Please take a look at these 3 rates of growth lines. The bottom one is a student. The red one is the classroom that the student is in, and the green one is all the students in the grade level. This is Discovery Math. And I always say this, I can't remember if this is 3rd or 4th grade or what it is, doesn't matter. Look, we also remember that the rate of growth is the slope of the line. So look at assessment window 1 and assessment window 2, just the first 2 data points. Look at the line with the greatest upward slope and just put in the chat box, which line is it? Blue, red, or green? And I'm looking at the chat box here. Should take you 5 seconds. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, it's blue. Now, that was the easy part. Here's the hard part. Based upon student rate of growth, is Mackenzie, the students in her class, or the students in the grade level growing the fastest? Who's responding to instruction the best? And look at the slope of the line again. Remember, this is rate of growth, not discrepancy. So the greatest slope of the line, whoever's doing that is going to be responding to instruction the best. So the correct answer is Mackenzie. Her rate of growth is faster than the grade level and the students in her class because the slope of the line is the steepest. Now, the issue is She's the farthest behind. But if you extrapolate that rate of growth from the 2 data points and you extrapolate it up, you see that at some point, that rate of growth will bring her very close, if not ahead, of her classmates and grade level. Good question, Anna. So we're looking at rate of growth. Let's just take a look at this red line. So the red line, these students are growing, but not nearly at the rate of Mackenzie. So if we extrapolate here for that red line, forget the 3rd data point. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Forget the 3rd data point. Hold on, I gotta get my thing back here. Just look at the first 2 data points. If we extrapolate this rate of growth and we just keep it going, assumed it did that, that rate of growth would cross the 60 line about here. Now let's extrapolate Mackenzie. Whoops. She would be getting very close to where this class group is, because her rate of growth is about 50% greater than this. So here's the thing I want you to think about, is that in this case, because she is responding so strongly to the instruction, we would not want to change the instruction. If we did, then it might change this tremendous rate of growth. So this is a case where, based upon the rate of growth, even though she's behind, we would not want to change the instruction, because if we extrapolate it, then it will bring her into range. And this is the dilemma we deal with instructional decision-making. When we look at rate of growth, that is the best measure of the effectiveness of instruction. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out here is take a look at between data points 2 and 3. If you were not collecting data on the specific classroom and the grade level, and you only had Mackenzie's data, you would think, oh my goodness, the instruction is now less effective than it was in the first semester. And you'd be like, what's happened to Mackenzie? Nothing's happened to Mackenzie. Look at her classmates. They've fallen off more than she has. She is maintaining the growth that the grade level is, but not that her class is. Her class went flat. Basically, between December and February, her class did not grow at all. Yet Mackenzie did, and the other classrooms did, not this classroom. But even still, Mackenzie's rate of growth, that line is steeper than this one. So even though she's in this class where not a lot of growth is happening, she is continuing to grow. So make some comments in the chat box about that. If we're not using discrepancy, I mean, what if we're having a team meeting, and let's say this is could be Mackenzie or could be a group of students, and the teacher's concerned that the student is so far behind. Yes, she's growing so well, but look how far behind she is. We have to be able to project this growth here. How do we do that? Well, we have data to do that, and we're gonna see that as our day goes on. Okay, so always absolutely, Becky, because Mackenzie's part of a group. The question here, so always know what the group level data says about the growth of the group prior to problem. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We have to have those data. We have to have the individual student or group of students. We have to have the other kids in tier one. And in this particular case, it's not unusual. Mackenzie's in a class that class is lagging the grade level significantly. So as a building principal, I would look at these data and I'm like, I got to get into this classroom, and we have to figure out what's going on here. Now, I'm just going to show you, this is academic data. Look at the behavior data. This is on task, time on task. And this is Mackenzie. And this is her peers in her classroom, not the grade level, her classroom. Just take a look at the first two data points. Who's improving and on task the most, Mackenzie or her peers? It's pretty obvious that it's Mackenzie. Now, if you were only taking behavior data on Mackenzie, you would go, what the heck happened in February? Whatever we're doing to help her on task, it all fell apart, blah, blah, blah. No, it didn't. The whole doggone class fell apart. And once again, the rate of Mackenzie's loss is less than the rate of her classmates, because Mackenzie's line is not as much going down as this line. You can see they're not parallel. This line is greater than Mackenzie's. So two things here. Never make a decision about an individual student or a small group of students until you know what else is going on with other students in that classroom. And in this case, we would not look at Mackenzie, we would say, what is going on in this classroom? So, quick summary, back to rate of growth. Rate of growth, Mackenzie is the fastest because her rate of growth is the steepest. Mackenzie is responding to whatever is being done instructionally at a very high rate. Be patient. Once the rate of growth is going to project to meet the standard, then we don't make any changes, even though that's hard to do because you say she's so far behind. Project. We're going to give you data. If you're using STAR data, Renaissance Learning, if you're using DIBELS, if you're using any of those kinds of data, FastBridge or what have you, it projects for you based upon this rate of growth where that student is going to be at the next assessment window. These data don't do that. You have to physically do it. But if you're using anything like Renaissance or DIBELS or FastBridge or what have you, it'll project it and tell you where it's going to be. Do you want to put any comments in the chat box? Any questions? Just put in there. Can we move forward? Is this making sense to you, even if it's even if you see it being problematic to implement? Please do, Anna. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you made the comment about looking at the whole class and not just Mackenzie, because I'm a special ed teacher, and I would say 99% of the time we're taking a look in an IEP meeting at the specific student and not like the class trends. Just when we're talking about academic engagement, if a student is doing really well, then great, and we typically don't evaluate the whole class, but if there is disengagement, it's really just like put on the student instead of looking at the instructional practices. So I'm going to, challenge that moving forward when I'm in part of IEP meetings, but I've never really I feel like it's kind of attacking the teacher a little bit, but I totally understand why we want to take a look at the whole class and the instruction happening overall, and not just pointing out, oh, this student is just not doing well.
Right. And so, Anna, yes, it's and thank you for chiming in here. So it's not attacking the teacher. Let's say in this case, and what we say on the screen, let's say that this class happens to be a very difficult class. As a building principal, when we did class student assignments to classrooms, I did that with the teaching teams. And I often said, look, if you want these 5 kids, This is going to be a challenge because these 5 kids can certainly disrupt instruction and reduce academic engaged time to everyone, because every time the teacher is having to work with an individual student or a group of students to get them back on task, it's likely instruction has been suspended during that activity. So that represents a loss of instructional time. So we made decisions all the time about, okay, we can put fewer kids in that class if you want to take all 5 of these students, or what we can do is give you more supports in that class. And my comment was always, I want to support you and the students that you feel you can move along. But at the same time, we can't have a loss of academic engaged time. So we will mitigate that by scaffolding supports or doing whatever. So if we have a student, Anna, who's included in inclusion, the climate of that classroom, the amount of academic engaged time or not, is going to affect vulnerable kids more than kids who might be grade level competent. So it's absolutely critical. So I'm going to make one more comment and then we got to move on. When we're doing behavioral observations, I'm working with a large school district in the Midwest and helping them implement MTSS, and they're at all levels. And so if the psychs on the call here, or whoever does behavioral observations, the only behavioral observation platform that's going to be helpful is one that we can assess the target student, the peers, and the interaction between the target student and the teacher and peers in terms of engagement. And those observation forms exist. So I never, ever take behavioral data on simply a target student. I'm taking it on representative peers as well. And I'm simultaneously evaluating the degree to which what the teacher behaviors are for around engagement, whether it's approval of appropriate behavior, disapproval of inappropriate behavior, whether it's reinforcement errors, accidentally reinforcing inappropriate behavior. So everything has to be interactive here, but at the very least, we never want to interpret individual and student data without interpreting the context in which that instruction is being delivered, the other peer performance and what have you. So yes. But once again, it may be that the teacher has a very difficult class. And at that point, if that's the case, like I said, if I saw something like this as a building principal, we would have a meeting, a team meeting, and say, hey, how do we support increasing academic engaged time in this class? So does that address, Anna?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So reflection 2. And we just experienced that challenge in terms of interpreting this. What challenges do you have as a district or building leader to ensure that rate of growth is used rather than discrepancy in making all the instructional decisions? So please put that in the chat box, if you will. Well, what are the barriers? What conversations, courageous conversations, have to happen here to get us to focus on that rate of growth and not be distracted by the gap? Because until we do that, we really can't do the data interpretation. Just put some thoughts in the chat box. Yeah, Becky, that's a good. So then what supports do we have to have for those newer teachers? Is that curriculum support, or is also interpreting data? And Sarah, you are absolutely spot on. It is switching from wait to fail. And that intervention prevention mindset, the metric for it is rate of growth. You're right, Kevin. They're not. Kevin's got building administrators aren't always the best instructional leaders. Man, that's true. And I know that in my years where I was resembling one of these, that I was fortunate to work in a district where an instructional leader was a primary job requirement for building principals. And Kevin, how can they adequately support their teachers through this shift without being fully versed in the best approach to doing so? So there's a long and a short answer to that. I'll give you the short answer. You know, whenever you can equate a principal at times with being a consultant. Consultants who facilitate really well and don't pretend to have content knowledge can still be effective. So as a building principal, you know, and if I didn't have the instructional background, but I understood data and understood growth, I might say something to that teacher or the team like, help me understand why, if in this case, McKinsey is making the fastest rate of growth possible, why we would switch the instruction. Because I don't think McKinsey's line can go up any steeper than it's going. So help me understand that. That's an example of exactly what I would say. I don't know if that's helpful, Kevin, or not. Because a leader not only helps make those decisions, but every interaction a building principal has with a teacher or teaching team or the staff should have an education component. We should empower them to do the thinking without telling them what we already know. And if it doesn't work, then we can tell them what we already know. But keeping them engaged by courageous questions. Okay. So moving along. Summarizing. So to do data evaluation, we need to have two things. We need to have a rate of growth metric, and we need to have decision rules to determine if the rate of growth is sufficient. So I'm going to shake you up today, maybe, hopefully not, but maybe a little bit. We can't use data in the form of numbers. We just can't. We don't have to Kevin's point, we don't have enough people who know how to interpret numbers. We just don't, nor should we. So, and I'm going to go back to, I've used this example before, and I'm sure you do the same thing, but every year I go for a physical, and every year I have a complete blood workup where they take I think they're draining me of my blood, right? And within a couple of days, I use Quest Labs, within a couple of days, I get a report. And until about 5 or 6 years ago, those reports had all the different numbers, like your white cell count or your cholesterol levels, and there's 3 or 4 of those levels. And I would look at that stuff and I'm like, what the heck? Am I about to die, or am I going to live forever, kind of thing? But about 5 or 6 years ago, they started putting those into green, yellow, and red. And they start giving you your last 5 years of trend data. So all I do is take a look at anything that's not green. And fortunately for me, I don't, but let's suppose that I had stuff that was yellow last year and I made lifestyle changes, or maybe I was put on medication or whatever. If my results this year are still yellow, my first thought is whatever my doctor's doing ain't working. Because the goal here was to move me out of the yellow and into the green. Now, for me to do that with raw data, I would have to know exactly the number that corresponded to the level of risk for every one of those 30 medical tests. And I do not have any idea what that is. But I'm not a physician. I shouldn't have to know that. A teacher shouldn't have to know that. A teacher should simply have to know What is the rate of growth around a risk level? That's it. And once we have that, then teachers who don't know, or other people who don't know anything about the raw numbers, can start making decisions about the effectiveness of the instruction or the intervention. So this is the first shake-up thing. We have to put numbers into levels of risk when we deliver that at a building or classroom level. So this is an example, and you have a copy of this in your, wherever that place is where I put stuff. So this is just an example. Every piece of data that we collect in schools can be put into levels of risk. We know that attendance, behavior, grades, those are part of the early warning system. They have national standards for what is a level of risk. But we also have it for academics. We can, and the one I gave you also has grades down here. So whether we're using FastBridge, STAR, what have you, those numbers are put into levels of risk. Grades, A's and B's are green. A C, I would put a C in a moderate risk. I put D's and F's in high risks. So you could, at the high school level, if you're doing 4.5 weeks assessment window, and 4.5 weeks into the first semester, you say, based upon the work that the student has done in 4.5 weeks, their grade right now projecting the next 4.5 weeks is an F. The teacher decides to do X, Y, Z. And the teacher saying, if I do that, I want to get this kid to at least passing for the first 9 weeks, even if I move him from an F to a D, because that's growth. Anything that changes, in this case, lowers a risk level, is significant and represents actual gap closing growth. So let's say at 9 weeks, this student now has a C- or a D+. They move from red to yellow. That teacher should be doing a hallelujah dance, because in 4.5 weeks, that teacher changed this student's rate of growth. So I saw something, I'm using my iPhone as well as my computer. So Kevin's chat box popped up in my phone first. Aren't grades only as good as they're actually? Of course. Same thing, that's called, that's called fidelity, validity. Same is true with STAR reading, FastBridge, attendance data. It's only as good as the validity of the data. So you struck at something here, Kevin. There have to be grading policies that are consistent. And I'm going to go into an instructional thing here too, Kevin, very quickly. So electronic grade books are amazing. They are a data set that we don't use enough. So teachers should say that in order to get that a grade is based upon the following. It's based upon classwork, homework, quizzes, chapter tests, and participation. I'm just making that up. So there are 5 elements that determine a student's grade, and an algorithm for that. 10% of them are quizzes. I don't know. And Kevin put in here if I'm not making sense. That not only have 5 categories, each category is weighted. That's typical. So now, when that student at 4.5 weeks is not passing, is getting an F, that teacher should first look at the algorithm to see which of the 5 elements are bringing the grade down. So let's say that the student is completing the classwork and the homework and is doing okay on quizzes and is bombing on chapter tests or unit tests, which account for 40% of the grade. Now we can begin problem solving and say, we need to take a look at what it is about this student and the unit tests that is causing this. It's not going to do the teacher any good to increase the quiz grades. That's not going to move the kid from an F to a D or a C. So you're absolutely right. But that is true of any data element. It has to have validity. And if we're using, I mean, a lot of people use star reading, star math, you know, it's good K through 12, et cetera. But what if it doesn't predict state assessments? So that's why, you know, until COVID, most places would, many of the school districts I work with, they would every assessment window, they would have the growth data, but they would also have the growth data from just pure growth in the district. They would also have the alignment with the, if this were the state assessment, what would the student's performance on the state assessment be? So yeah. So our goal in making database decisions for instructional purposes and to remove and to ensure consistency with keeping Kevin's warning here, we've got to have valid data, right? This is how we're going to do our work. So once data are placed into risk levels, now we can create the decision rules to determine the rate and type of growth. Then once we have that, we can do the second part. But let's just do the first part here. Let's see here. So I want you to do a reflection here. Discuss the degree to which you're already using risk level approach to organizing your data. Are you using it just for academic data or also behavior, attendance, etc.? What barriers would have to be eliminated or reduced to use it for all types of data in your setting? I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. And then I'm going to ask you to do an audience poll. The big idea is converting all data to risk levels. That now we have data we can work with. And if you're in a group, I'll give you a minute or so here to talk about that. Okay, can we put up audience poll number 2?
Absolutely. I'm launching it right now. You should be able to see that.
I can see it.
Great.
And whenever it gets up to that 80-ish%, you can post the results.
Not a problem. Not quite there yet.
Where are you?
About 65%.
Okay, a couple of people pop your answers in there.
Yeah,
So
for those of you that stepped away to use the restroom, come back and do your poll.
Right. just make a decision there. If you're not getting any more, let's go ahead and post them.
I see them trickling in. I'm going to give everybody 10 more seconds. We'd really like at least 5 more people to just click that button on your screen.
Now, 10 seconds should be adequate time to
It
click the
should
button.
be.
So we're matching time to the-
Yeah, nobody took the bait on that. So I'm just going to end the poll.
Come on,
Gentle
people.
nudging, gentle nudging. Okay, here we go.
Okay, go ahead and post it.
All right. And you should be able to see those results.
Great. All right. Awesome. That's outstanding. All right, great. Thank you. You can close it out. And let's move ahead. So now, and given that you have these risk levels, then we need the policy for what constitutes type and rate of growth. Once you have them, this is easy. A positive rate of growth means the student is improving and closing the gap. So red to yellow, depending on how many different levels you have, any movement yellow to blue, blue to green. If you only have 3 levels, anything moving toward the green and changing levels is positive. We'll talk about instructional implications shortly. Questionable is the student improves, but does not yet lower the level of risk. So it might be going from the lowest part of red to a middle or upper. It is growth, but it is not closing the gap yet. And poor is anything where you're moving toward the red, green to yellow, yellow to red, or yellow to blue. So now, if you have your data in risk levels, you can create instantly the decision rules for the type and rate of growth. And you don't have to worry about numbers again. So let me just. So for those of you, more than half of you said you do have all your data in risk levels. Please put in the chat box whether or not your district has a policy or guidelines about how to interpret rate of growth in the context of lowering or worsening of risk levels. Do you have rules like this so that everybody will make the same decision about the rate and type of growth? If you put that in the chat box, please. Could be just, no, we need to create rules. Yes, we have them, whatever. Yeah, and what we don't want is what Anna put in here. We don't want people interpreting the data differently. It's not going to be helpful for instructional. All right, Ellen, yes, we do. Awesome. We need to create rules, but are moving it, yes. Well, and Michelle, if this is what's on the screen is what you need. This is not rocket science. If you already have everything in risk levels and you're happy with the data and you have consensus around that, then the decision rules are easily done. Any other stuff in the chat box?
I'm just checking, George, and I don't see anything right now.
Okay.
Well, oh no, Anna just put, I'm expected to interpret psych evals.
Yeah,
Just
well,
to-
you shouldn't
just
have
to clarify on that, it's just interesting because you're talking about how, you're not supposed to be the professional in all specific areas, right? Like leave it to that specific person to interpret, something like you were talking about earlier. So it's not exactly the same thing, but I feel like I need to do that for IEPs sometimes.
Absolutely, and you shouldn't have to interpret data. The data should be presented to you in a way that it gives you what you need to know in order to decide what to do. And if it's not, that's a problem. Okay, so let's look at some examples. I'm showing you this because this is the kind of data set I'm going to give you for our practical examples coming up shortly. So this, and I just had to pick one. I have examples of FastBridge, I have example of Dibbles. I'm just picking this one because star data tends to be used consistently. So in star data, as you know, there are 5 levels of performance. This level 1 is very high risk, some risk, very low risk, and if you're at level 5, it's almost no risk. So if a student, let me see here, hold on. I'm going to do this first. If a student or group of students lowers a risk level, they move from level 1 or red to here, to here, to here. That clearly is significant improvement and the gap is closing. If a student moves from a lower level of yellow to a higher level of yellow, that's improvement, but the gap is not closing. When we get to instructional decisions, I work all the time with teachers who say, look, this student is on the cusp of moving to a lower risk level. I don't want to change anything I'm doing. And that would be fine. At our next decision meeting, we'll see if the student has lowered the risk level. If not, then we don't go more than one meeting where the student was expected to lower the risk level and didn't, without looking at modifying the instruction, because we're wasting too much time. We're running out of time as those assessment windows move across the year. Anything where a student moves to here, from green to blue, blue to yellow, yellow to red, that's a poor response. Now, here's my point, and I'm glad so many of you are converting these to risk levels. How would we know that this range here, 424, at or above 424, is level 4? And let's say that a student significantly improved that scale score number at the next assessment window. We would expect that to reflect a lowered risk level, but it doesn't, because the expectation goes higher for the next assessment window. And so we can have huge jumps in standard score, and the student actually increase their risk level rather than lowering it. So this is why we have to have the risk levels, because we can't use the raw data to make a decision. So in this particular case, if we take a look, I'm going to go back here, take a look at this one. Right now, if we combine level 5 and level 4, 34% of our students in this grade level are in the 2 levels of green. At the next assessment window in the winter, that has jumped from, what did I say it was? 34% of our students to 45% of the students. You should be very happy with that. We have an 11% increase in the percent of our students that have moved into the proficient level. And if we take a look at 32% of our students were at level 3 in the fall, and 29% level 3 in the winter, well, you would expect this to go down because the students should be moving from the higher risk levels into the lower risk levels. 11% of them should be. Now, something I want you to see here, and I'll show it to you again later. Please look at level 1. 10% in the fall. In the winter, 10%. It is often the case that everybody improves except your most at-risk students. It is most often the case that whatever your instructional decisions are for students in lower risk levels, yellow, blue, will not work for students in your highest risk levels. Students in your highest risk levels have the least capacity to improve with instructional modifications that are not intense, specifically designed for those students. We'll come back to that later. So this is a summary of those two that I just showed you. We had 1%, went from 1% to 2%, went from 33% to 43%. So we see that there's a 11% increase in levels 5 and 4, and an 11% decrease in levels 3 and 2. That kind of matched the increase in levels 4 and 5, but very high risk was dead in the water. We should have predicted that if what we were doing for those high risk kids was basically the same stuff for the very high risk kids, as if it was the same stuff we're doing for the high risk or some risk. Okay, I see here. Okay. Check your chat box. Lauren just posted a note. I'm going to show you one more piece of data here, and then we're going to take a break at 10 o'clock, and then we're going to come back and start using this information to practice with for the rest of our time. This is a tier 2 intervention. Grade 6, it was star reading. This is the screening data, and we had 11 kids in the blue lines, 11 students who had not made any progress. They were students in risk level 3 on the star reading. And across 2 assessment windows, they had not made any, they didn't get out of the blue. So the grade level team targeted these 11 students, saying they're not improving their risk level at all. We have to deal with them. So here's the decision-making process they went through. 11 students, I think it was 4th grade, I mislabeled the other. In 4th grade, were level 3 on STAR. They evidenced questionable to poor response to instruction because they remain at the same level of risk across multiple assessment windows. So here's the trigger. You have a group of kids who are at the same level of risk across 2 assessment windows. That's action. These students received tier 2 supports in the form of win groups. 7 of the 11 students reduced their risk level from level 3 to level 2 and 1. So 63% roughly of the students evidenced a positive response to instruction. They lowered a risk level. 36% evidenced a questionable response. They improved slightly, but did not lower a risk level. So I'm going to go back here. These are the pre and post data. So the post data are the orange. And you will see that, I'm using my pen to point here, you will see that 7 of the students achieved the level to lower risk level. Actually, this student lowered 2 risk levels. These 4 students did not lower a risk level. This one didn't improve at all. This one, I don't know if that one improved much or not. These 2 improved, but didn't lower a risk level. Something I want you to see, however, and this is totally an aside, but it's important. The 4 students who did not lower a risk level were 4 of the highest performing of the 11 students before the tier 2 intervention. Current level of student performance does not necessarily predict growth, because you don't know whether or not the instruction was matched to these student needs. It clearly worked for these students. So now, why didn't it work for these students? And it's probably an instructional match. So switching to our MTSS hat for a moment. Effective tier 2 instruction, all things being equal, should work for about 2/3 of the kids that receive that tier 2 intervention or instruction. That's what the research tells us. That's why the most efficient way to do MTSS is you take kids at risk that have the same area of risk. In this case, it was comprehension. And you apply an evidence-based instructional approach for that particular instructional need, in this case, comprehension. And when you apply that, you expect that it should work for at least 67% of the kids, and will identify the kids who need more intensive instruction. The only way to identify kids who need more intensive instruction is through a response to instruction approach. Their previous level of performance, it by itself is not going to predict it. And to be honest with you, who has the time to do 11 individual evaluations of students? You're not going to get that done, and they're going to lose instructional. You're going to be, all that time that it takes to do those evaluations is lost instructional time. So in this case, here's what happened. The 4 students who did not lower risk were 4 of the highest performing. The takeaway: level of performance doesn't predict future. Second, these students were not at a significant level of risk, but using a growth mindset. These students were in blue on the STAR system. They're not yellow or red, but using the growth mindset, these students were not improving significantly. The lack of growth over time should trigger problem solving, regardless of the risk level, except for green. And third, this is a perfect example of how a growth mindset will ensure the resource will be made available to anyone who's not growing before they start going back in the opposite direction. So food for thought here. So for your break, I'm going to go ahead and move to this next set of decision rules. They're very straightforward. If students, and this should be a policy to guide everybody's decision-making. If students or an individual student have a positive response, meaning they've improved and lowered a risk level, then you will continue the implementation of whatever you're doing until the students attain the desired level, and then identify a transition plan to fade the supports while monitoring performance levels. So it's continue and plan for transition. If it is a questionable, meaning they've improved but not lowered a risk level, the first thing is be sure that the student got the instruction in sufficient amounts with integrity. I will tell you the number one threat for questionable is students not getting sufficient instructional exposure. And if the answer is yes, they got it for the right amount of time and it was delivered the way it was supposed to, then increase the intensity. That instruction is working. It's just not strong enough. So increase the exposure to it first and take a look at growth rates. If the rate improves, continue. If it doesn't, you're going to have to go back to problem solving and figure out why it's not working. But don't go crazy here. Students who are improving but not lowering risk, you have instruction that is working. It's just not working enough. So increase the intensity of it. And remember, in a multi-tiered system, intensity is time, focus, and type. We're going to end our day with that. If it is poor, meaning they're going in the opposite direction and they got sufficient time and it was delivered with integrity, then you need to bring it back to problem solving immediately. This student is going the wrong way and running out of time, or this group of students are going the wrong way and running out of time. So imagine meetings now where you're looking at group data or individual student data. Once you have the criteria, the decision rules for positive, questionable, or poor, you should know exactly what the instructional decision-making is going to look like. If you have these decision rules for instruction that go along with the decision rules for growth. So I have a couple of minutes after 10. And this is just what I said before, reminding you that levels of intensity are time, focus, and type. We'll come back to that. And we'll come back to our reflection. So please, let's take a 15-minute break. I want you to think about not only your decision rules, but your instructional decision rules. And now we're going to move into what do protocols look like that will help us do this. So I have 4 minutes after 10. So let's come back at 19 minutes after 10. I'll see you then. Right. All right, welcome back, everybody. A couple of things before we move on to practice. First, if you would put anything in the chat box that you thought about, have questions about, want me to comment on before we begin moving into our practice segment, I would appreciate that. A couple of things as we move on to the practice and thinking about instruction. Remember, to intensify, we should have, everybody should understand what intensify means. First, more time. Second, we're going to move that instruction, narrow it to the areas that the student is not responding to. So going back to the Kevin example before with the high school, we would narrow it to that unit test. And then would say, look, whatever we're doing is working for everything else. What are we going to have to do now to help this student on the unit tests? So time, focus, and type. So a facilitator of the meeting, whether it's for an individual student or a group of students, says, if we need more time, do we have it? If not, where are we going to get it? Let's all be sure that we know now that we have the time what we're focusing the instruction on. And let's talk about the type of instruction. So in some cases, and I've told you this before, I very much advocate for increasing time first, particularly for those questionable responses. Kids are responding. So kids, we all know that kids don't grow at the same rate when the amount of exposure to instruction is held constant. The vast majority of our kids do not have major learning issues. For most of our kids, it's exposure to instruction. So with that in mind, just a summary, that implementation integrity has two components. Do we have enough time? And is the instruction being delivered the way it's supposed to be delivered? One is a schedule issue. The other is a professional learning issue. I don't want to oversimplify it, but it is that simple. Sufficiency is, do we have time in the schedule? Integrity is, what are our structures for ensuring that people are delivering this instruction the way it's intended? You know, I would go back in the case of McKinsey and say, how come that classroom is not improving when everybody else is? Is this a sufficiency issue? The kids are distracting this teacher, and the teacher's spending so much time managing kids that she or he is not delivering the minutes of quality instruction, even though they know how to? Or is it a classroom where behavior is not an issue, but instructional integrity is an issue? That is a purposeful decision. And this is just kind of a summary of everything that we've said so far. I'm not going to go through it. You can choose to look at it if you wish for maybe some talking points or discussion points along the way. So we've discussed the decision rules. We've discussed having a guidance document, and we've discussed moving into now the protocols to do this. So to get you right engaged very quickly, audience poll 3, please, Lauren. In my school or district, creating decision rules for both growth and instructional decision-making would improve the consistency in practice and improve student outcomes. Yes or no? Single choice. But continuum of. You only get to pick one. You should be refreshed now. No bathroom breaks. You have fresh coffee.
We're
So
getting closer
everybody,
to 70% here, closer, but we still need a couple more. I'll give everybody
Whenever-
10 more seconds.
whatever you decide, Lauren, is fine with me.
Yep, 10 more seconds. I think we can squeak out one more person. Come on, everybody. Okay, I'm going to end that poll and share the results here. And there you
Okay,
go.
then just do it.
Done.
87% of you said yes. I appreciate the 13% that are neutral. That's good honesty. And I wish we had more time. If you want to put anything in the box, you know, it would probably self-identify what you picked. But if you feel safe with your friends here, what maybe some issues are that you know, would have to be addressed for you to move from neutral to agree. I'll keep an eye on the chat box in case you choose to do that. All right, so what I would like for you to do now is you have a document. Let me just be sure I'm on. Hold on here. You have a document in your, wherever you get the documents from, that says guided practice. Now I'm going to switch my screen here for a moment to recoup that document.
And I think Kirsten is going to be putting that in the chat. Everyone has access to the folder with all of the documents in them. Do you know the exact name of that specific one?
Yes, I'm going to show it here.
Okay.
It is called Worksheet 1 Guided Practice Overall School.
Yes, everyone should have access to that in the folder. And then I think Kirsten can probably pop the exact link to that directly.
Okay, great. So I'll give about, I'll yap here for a second while you guys are accessing the document.
Okay, thank you.
So it would, it would be helpful, and these data are from the data set, a STAR data set. With this particular school district has 4 risk levels, not 5. So hopefully the team would have the data for the middle of the year. This is a middle of year and end of year overall data set. So the middle of the year, you see what percent of the students were in each of the 4 levels. At the end of the year, you see what percent of the students are in each of the 4 levels. So the last column is increase or decrease, which really is asking what percent of the students have grown and in what direction. So I want you to just look at those data for a moment. And I want you to reflect on, do you have a data protocol that looks like this that can guide decision making? So as you look at this document, and would you do me a favor, put in the chat box, just put in the chat box whether you have the document or not. That way I'll know.
It's inevitable, and
Got it.
every time I turn on
Got
my
it.
microphone that the dogs bark, but I did want to say, person just put that in the chat.
Yeah, I see it. I also saw bark in the chat. Okay, glad that you got it. So now, step 2, in the protocol, we have a reminder of what low risk, at risk, and high risk is. Then there's a step to calculate your data. So we break the data down into adding the low risk and college pathway together and the sum and high risk together. So by adding the college pathway plus the low risk, that comes out in the middle of the year, 35.6% of the kids were in those 2 categories. At the end of the year, that number is 38.5, with an overall change of almost a 3% improvement. And the thing to notice here, if you go back to the front, is that 2.9% moved into college pathway and low risk, and 2.9% moved out of the sum and high risk categories. It doesn't always match that way, but it's usually close. Now, for the 2 risk categories, high risk and some risk, which of those 2 made the most improvement? It was the high risk, because almost, yeah, right, Anna, almost 2% reduction in that high risk category. Now, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. and put this slide up here before we move on with the rest of that document. Each school has to have a process for reviewing the data. This process needs to be explicit. It needs to describe the steps, and it needs to have the dates calendared. So step one, this is an example of one of the school districts I'm working with now. You can do whatever you want, obviously, but it has to be a stepwise protocol to guide the process as well as your protocols to interpret the data. So step one, the principal and grade level or subject area, in high school that could be department heads, leaders meet to review the data and identify the types and levels of growth for whole school and grade level subject area. In addition, the team reviews the disaggregated data. We'll look at that in a moment. Step two, the product of that meeting is that the principal and the grade level or subject area leaders develop a presentation to present to the entire staff on interpretation of the overall data. Now remember that the grade level or subject area leaders are in that meeting with the principal. Step three is those grade level or subject area leaders meet with their grade level or subject area teachers to review and interpret the data. The grade level interpretation or the subject area is the responsibility of those grade level leaders. Step four is individual teachers review their student data to review it, interpret it, and identify students who have positive, questionable, and poor response to instruction. Individual teachers with support from peers and grade level leaders use decision rules to make instructional decisions. So we move from a global step one all the way down to step five, which is where those instructional decisions are made. Now, for groups, those instructional decisions could be made with teachers and the grade level leaders or teachers and the subject area leaders. But at some point, those individual teachers have to use those decision rules to figure out which specific students are not growing and make the instructional decisions for based upon that level of growth. So would you just put into the chat room right now whether or not, to what degree you have this kind of process explicit and calendared, so you can move from admiring the data, if you will, to doing something about it. So if you please populate the chat box with comments about the explicitness of your data interpretation, and in particular, step two, which is an all staff presentation of the data. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Becky. Anybody else want to comment before we go back to the worksheet? Okay. All right, now I'm going to ask you in groups to do something here. Share screen. Go back to all right, so either as an individual or if you're in teams, I would like for you, just with these data here, and I'm going to give you 3 to 5 minutes to do this. With this data right here, what talking points would you want to include to present this table to your entire staff? What are you specifically going to use this chart to communicate? And I would appreciate that if you would put some of your talking points in the chat box so that your colleagues can see that as well. This doesn't have to be rocket science, basic stuff. Do you want your entire school staff to feel good about this? Do you want them to be, what do you want to say? And a good question. This is literacy. This particular table is literacy.
No, I mean, those are my talking points.
Oh, okay.
Like what specific courses we're looking at when we're taking a look at the ELA data.
Okay. This, you could treat this generically. Don't worry about the disaggregated data yet. This is overall school. So post some of your talking points in the chat box. Okay, if you scroll down on this worksheet, you will see what this particular school put in their talking points. It says possible summary. Yeah, and I see, Anna, I think the phrasing it as questions is a great idea. You'll see that that's what this school did. But on the presenting the data, they just actually presented the data first. And then when it came to issues of why, how, et cetera, they moved to questions. Yeah, Karen, I see your comment there. You don't want to make this too complicated. Remember that one of the goals to this all school meeting is to give an overall interpretation of the data. And in this case, we want the staff to feel good that we're moving in the right direction. You can't get very specific with just the overall school data. Definitely, Anna. Yep. And Lori, I think, that would be in some ways sufficient. I would probably point, to some of the data actual, but the big idea here is we're moving kids in the right direction. Yep, and remember also on those two low or no risk levels, that college pathway is going to be your highest performing students. We want to honor it when it increases, but we don't want to give the impression that everybody should be at the college pathway. We'll set ourselves up for some difficulties there. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Scroll down to step 3. In this case, we're going to be disaggregating the data. And you've got to be able to get your data disaggregated. So let's just take a look at this data table. For the middle of the year, we have disaggregated non-special ed and special ed. And for the end of the year, non-special ed and special ed. And the difference between non-special ed growth rates and special ed. So at the middle of the year, 13.1% of our students were in college pathway who were non-special ed. At the end of the year, that dropped to 10.4%, or a loss of 2.7%. For low risk, we were at 24.4, went up to 29. The difference was a positive 4.6. That positive 4.6 probably came from some of the minus 2.7, right? And there was a slight reduction in the sum risk from 33.7 to 32. So if you take a look at minus 2.7 and minus 1.7, that's minus 4.4, which accounts for almost all of the 4.6. So good news, bad news. We have almost 3% falling out of college pathway, but we have almost 2% coming from some risk to low risk. Now look at the high risk category. Non-special ed, 28.9, 28.7. Once again, basically no movement. So there's that high risk category causing issues again. Let's look at special ed. Special ed went from 2.4 in college pathway to 2.7, a slight increase. From 7.2 in low risk to 6.8, slight decrease. 14.8 in the some risk to 15%. So little bit high risk, 75, 75. So if we take a look at all of these data here, there's basically little or no change. And let's take a look at the special ed. Special ed was middle of the year, 9.6% of the kids were in college pathway or low risk. At the end of the year, it was 9.5, basically no movement, right? And in the case of non-special ed kids, we already described those data. We have some falling out of the high risk. So basically, between the middle of the year and the end of the year, the middle of the year and the end of the year, this school has not changed much. So what would be your talking points if this were your data set for the disaggregated group? What would we say?
I'm not sure if you saw, but there is a question in the chat. For
I
you.
did. So
Okay.
when looking at the type of data, what would the N count make a difference or should be tracked? Thinking about high transient rates, schools where the number may be different middle of year to end of year. Absolutely. So Becky, there's a couple of ways to deal with that. If you have a district level data system, you can get two different displays. One like this with overall. The second is the data could be limited to the students who were at the end of the year, who were in the database at the middle of the year. It's not hard to do that. This is just how you want your data presented, but it's a good question. The N can make a difference, certainly, because in a smaller N, we have one student can make a significant difference either way. You would want to look at that. But given that this is all school data, that makes the N possibly higher. Yeah, with your comprehensive school improvement schools, absolutely. Your data for your targeted schools, whether they're targeted or comprehensive, needs to be as precise as possible. But the bottom line here is that at this particular school, there is not a lot of movement with any of the groups. That's yeah. Okay. So here is a possible summary. This is what this particular school, how they wanted to summarize this, for food for thought. I think it's really important when you're giving the presentation to the entire school that the entire school knows that the talking points and the presentation were developed by not only the administration, but teacher leaders from every grade or subject area, so that this doesn't come across as the administration telling the staff. In fact, this is a conversation that involves teachers and administrators that's being shared with all teachers and all administrators. And it's important, you can decide what level of disaggregation you want, but students with and without disabilities is certainly a high priority disaggregation. Any comments? All right. So now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to ask you oops. Oh, there's an audience poll. Lauren, if we could do the audience poll here.
Yep, I'm going to launch that right now. And you should see that. I will wait for a couple more people. I know a few more of you can answer that question. 10 more seconds. Okay, we have about 75%. That's not bad for
Awesome.
10:53 in
No,
the
that's
morning, right?
toward the end of the presentation. That's
I know.
awesome.
I think that's not
Thank
too
you.
shabby. There you go.
Okay. All right. This is about what I expected. So the more of these, so take a look at these steps, like the steps 1 through 5 or whatever it was for sharing and breaking down data, the protocols, data being presented in a way that's workable. Those things, if they're not present, really can be what we attribute inconsistent use and interpretation of data around. So to summarize, we've talked about 3 things here so far: the decision rules for growth, improvement, the decision rules for instructional decisions, the guidelines for calendaring those data assessment windows, and a stepwise process that moves us from overall school down to individual teachers identifying students who need supports. Those 4 things that, when present, will significantly increase the effectiveness of instruction, whether it's academic or behavior, and move students. If we don't have those things, there's so much noise in the system and so many places for inconsistency that our use of data is not really going to impact student growth. So we'll come back to that. Now, here's what I'd like for you to do. Oops, this was the guided practice. We just went through all of that. Now, let me see here. Hold on a second. I got to move this so I can see them. So if you will access your independent practice worksheet, this is a new data set, and I'm going to ask you to do something on your own here that follows what we just did on the guided data set. So would you please put in the chat box when you have located your independent practice worksheet?
Thank you, Kirsten, for popping that in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody's on top of their game today. Everybody got it? PDF version, that's great, yeah. Excellent, okay. Here's what I would like for you to do. I'm gonna keep this simple, just so you can experience part of this to get a gut level feel for it and to be successful. You have this data set, which is presented to you in the same format as the guided example, but there are different data. I would like for you to look at those data. Let me see here. I can't scroll this down without getting the independent. Hold on. Let me see if I can get this. Bam. This format looks exactly like the previous format. So let me go back to my shared screen here. What I would like for you to do is, using this worksheet, if I scroll this down, you would have a place where you can calculate what % of your students at the middle of the year were college pathway and low risk, what % of them at the end of the year were college pathway in low risk, and the same thing for some in high risk. So I would like for you to do that calculation. And then I would like for you to put in the chat box what talking points you would want to include in an all staff presentation. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do that. So I'll monitor the chat box for your talking points. Go. Bye. 'So post your thoughts in the chat box. Thanks, Anna. You broke the seal. Five or six more minutes, or if you need a little more time. And Anna went on to take a look at some of the disaggregated. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Bryn. About 2 more minutes. Anybody else want to post, please do, because there are different, clearly different perspectives here, all of which are fine. Thanks, Becky. Okay. I appreciate everybody's looking at these data, and I'm going to give you my perspectives on it as well. So for an overall school presentation with these data, I would present the overall data that is on the screen in front of us, as well as any of the disaggregated data that help to explain Yep, thanks also, Michelle. That would help explain some of these data, but the bottom line for me is this. Overall, and we can then break this out a little bit, the percentage of students at low risk in college pathway at the middle of the year and the percentage of students at risk levels remained basically the same. Everybody held their place. We have 60% of our students who are at risk and 40% of our students who are not as much at risk. And there's very few changes in this process. So if I were the building principal and the people we were looking at these data with right now are grade level or subject area leaders, I would say, how do we present this in a way that is going to result in some action? So I would suggest to the group, or if the group suggested, that first we present these data and the disaggregated data very honestly, is basically the status of where our students are in risk levels. It has remained unchanged spring semester. There's been no significant declines, but students are not moving up. And then we would ask, we meaning the grade level or subject area leaders and myself, we would ask the grade levels or the subject areas if they would meet as a group and looking at their data, come up with ideas for how to move a greater percentage of the high and some risk kids into the lower risk categories. And we would calendar that, how much time do you need? Do you need a week? Do you need 2 weeks? Because when we want to get down to instructional changes, it has to be organic. So we have to get it down to those subject areas or grade level where they can look at their own data, look at their own students, and think about how to move these kids at the higher risk. I would then say, let's just say 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, the grade level or subject area leaders and I will meet again to come up with what your suggestions are. We'll then have another staff meeting and present those suggestions to everyone. That way it's not a top-down, it really is a bottom-up with teachers at the subject area and classroom level informing the building leadership, principal and grade level leaders, et cetera, on the directions that should be taken. At least that has to be done to get this organic input around the fact that we're not moving anybody. And we can't have 60% of our kids in this building at a risk level that is going to be unsuccessful for them. And at the same time, there are no quick solutions to this. So we have to acknowledge the problem. We're not going to fret over it. We're going to put it immediately into problem solving, and we're going to see what we come up with as a building about how to approach this. So put in the chat box if that makes sense to you, or if you would take a different approach to this. But we have to move from admiring this data to do something about it. So just take a couple of minutes to comment on that and come up with different ideas. There's no one solution to this. You have to have leadership in a building that facilitates change, but without prescribing it.
I think something I remember from the, this is Anna, by the way,
Yeah.
from one of the first UDL trainings that we had back in the fall is you said that building collaboration was more effective than one-on-one teacher collaboration. And so I've really
Absolutely.
like taken that and run with it this school year, and that's been like really cool. And I think it's, important to do that here too. I feel like, meeting as a building would create more change that's like, overall and school wide. But I guess I didn't really like interpret the data the same, and I guess like that's where numbers can kind of like, you can kind of read what you would want to from the data too. And I feel like I kind of did that for this set.
Yeah. And I think that once you have the protocols to guide, that people will get better at that. When I work with school districts, and I began with another school district last July, actually. First thing we did is I gave them protocols like this. They then developed their own protocols. Then the data people in that district organized the data so they could be put into the protocol. And then we had school principals. I trained the school principals, and they trained their leadership teams. And we gave them case examples, and they had professional learning sessions where they did just what we're doing here until people got comfortable interpreting, going through the steps in a consistent way. But I thank you, Anna, for bringing up that issue about the collaboration. There is no way a building principal or a leadership team in a building is going to solve this problem themselves. However, they have to lead with, look, we're not moving people. We're moving some people a little bit, but that is not going to be the solution. As a whole school, we have to problem solve this and then set up the structure to begin that problem solving process to engage everyone in determining what to do. If we engage everyone, then when the plan is laid out, they will engage the plan because they engage the solution. And I think I don't know if I gave you an example. We may not in this series, but we use this process in a school district in Cape Cod at a high school level. And the outcome of this was that they changed their schedule, that they reallocated staff time to target their some risk and high risk students. They started off by doing this with algebra because there was 28% of the students not passing algebra. And as a result of this, they added 2 periods for the high-risk kids. Instead of 5 periods, they went to 7 periods for the week. They changed the schedule and they reallocated staff to be able to do that. And within 1 year, they had moved it from 28% of the kids not passing algebra down to 2%. But the process was the same. It's like, look, our kids, 28% are failing algebra mid-year, 28% failed at the end of the year. Whatever we did didn't change that, change the prediction. We don't want to be able to predict failure accurately. So I'm just giving you examples of ways to think about this. That's all. So somehow or other, I jumped here and I don't know how or why. So I have one more activity for you to do. And this is going to go back to something we dealt with earlier. So will you please go get your individual student document and put in there's 2 things I want you to get. One is the individual student document, and the other is a STAR comparison data set. Will you tell me when you have both of those, please, in the chat box? Awesome. I messed that up. Hold on. Now, I can't do both of these on my screen at the same time. So let me give you an overview first. And Lauren, just tell me what's on my screen or what's on your screen right now is this practice worksheet decision guide.
That's
Yes.
correct. Yes.
Okay. So folks, gonna have to be able to abstract here a little bit. I'm giving you this now to an individual student basis for a couple of reasons. Number one, to show you what we do with an individual student, but number two, to show you how bigger is not necessarily better. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to give you one example, but I have to switch to the comparisons. You have 3 students here. The first one is the fall assessment, and the second one is the winter assessment. The scale scores for students 1, 2, and 3 for the fall are 315, 195, and 425. Has everybody got that in the chat box? Just put thumbs up or something. I don't want to lose you here. Great. For the winter, the same student scale scores went from 315 to 450, 195 to 340, and 425 to 460. Everybody improved in their scale scores, and some by huge numbers. Now, you have a data set that looks like this. I gotta stop sharing and reshare. You see the data set, Lauren?
Yes, we see that.
Perfect. So I'm moving my screen here for 1 second, just bear with me. So student 1 is 315 and student 2 is 195. So go on this chart. And for 315, I want you to tell me what level of risk in the fall 315 falls in. You would look at this part of it. Where does 315 fall? Put it in the chat box. Let me scaffold it. Yes, Anna's got it blue. 350, so level 1 is below 197. Level 2 is below 311. So 315 is above 311. And level 3 is between 422 and 311. So 315 would fall in the blue. Student number 2 is 195. Where does 195 fall in the risk level? Put it in the chat box, please. Yes, everyone got that one fast. Student 3 is 425. Where does 425 fall in the risk level? Which green? Be specific. Yes, yes. Okay, you guys are awesome. Now what I want you to do is I want you to find the risk levels for each of those students at the winter data set, which is the second chart on your data sets. So if you will do that, there have been massive number changes. I want you to convert those number changes to risk levels and then tell me if you're happy with the data for these 3 students. I'll give you, just let me know when you've got it done. But do it carefully. Put in the chat box just when you're done. Don't necessarily put in your data yet. Just tell me if you're done with computing the risk levels for those 3 students at the winter data set. Thanks, Anna. Anna, sorry. Be sure to post when you're done. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Ellen. Okay, now if you'll put in the chat box the answer to this question, and you can put yes, maybe, or no. Are you happy with the data and these students' progress when we're looking at changes in risk level? Are you happy yes? Are you happy maybe? Or are you happy no? and look for changes in risk level. So what's the bright spot, Michelle? Yep. Yeah, thanks, Anna. Yep. So I would interpret, I really like the fact that you focused on the growth first, because excuse my phone here. I'm having to use my phone for the camera. So I can stabilize it, that'll help. So I had student 1 staying in the yellow category, but growing. Student 2 staying in the red category, but growing. Student 3 moved from green level 4 to blue. So what I would say here is that student 1 and 2, particularly student 1 is getting very close to transitioning from yellow to blue. If I were the teacher, I would say this student is growing. I fully expect that in the next assessment window, this student is going to be out of the some risk level. There's a lot of nice movement there. The same is true for student number 2, getting very close to the top of that red level, and good probability for lowering risk. Student 3, we need to find out why that student fell out of the blue, fell out of the green and went into the blue. So my point here, interpreting the data is fine, but here's my point. Massive increases in raw standard scores can look like a significant improvement when it is not. That's the reality of it. We would have liked to have these students lower a risk level. After all, half a year has gone by. They're making improvement, and if you have good longitudinal data that looks at the previous 2, then it may be that these students really are accelerating quickly, but they're not closing the gap. So the fact that I gave you individual data meant that these students were probably students for whom we're doing tier 3 kind of decision making, and we would be doing a lot of very significant problem solving. So I would suggest that you have some type of an example like this to get people's awareness around an increase in raw score, even tremendous increase in raw score, might not have anything to do with lowering a risk, which means a positive response to instruction. 2 of these students are questionable and 1 is poor because 1 increased a risk level. So this is a good way to get people to really wrestle with this growth versus discrepancy issue. And that's why I gave you this example in case you wanted to use any of this moving forward. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left in this process, and I walked you through all of these steps in this process. I have added something to the presentation today that is not in your PowerPoint, but the document is accessible to you through whatever that portal is that you're getting these from. So I'm going to stop sharing, go back to share, and go back to my screen. When it comes to problem solving, whether we're either using this for groups or individual students, we have to have a framework to problem solve. There are 4 key domains to learning, and you've seen this before: instruction, curriculum, environment, and learner. Those 4 domains will provide you with structure for problem solving for students who are not making the progress you want them to make, either individuals or group. We've talked before in the fall about curriculum is what we teach, instruction is how we teach it. Environment are those things that can either facilitate curriculum and the impact of instruction or serve as barriers. And then finally, what the learner brings to this. When we're problem solving, let's take its student number 1. Tremendous growth, but not lowering at risk. We need to organize our thoughts around what might be the reason for this. Is it something about the curriculum? Is it something about the instruction? Is it something about the environment? It could be attendance. It could be the students, the classroom, and being on task. It could be that this student has moved schools frequently. It also could be the learner. The learner may not have the skills to remain on task, a whole variety of things. This document provides you with the opportunity, and let me get the, hold on one second, please. This document enables you to use these 4 domains for problem solving. So if you scroll down in this document, you will find that the following pages provide you with possible reasons why instruction may not be may need improvement. So the block of time allotted per subject area. Are we using differentiated instruction? Are we using explicit instruction? Are we using a variety of practice and application activities? And it provides you with ways of collecting data, whether reviewing data, interviewing, observing, or actual direct assessment. So I don't know what framework your school or district has for problem solving when students are not progressing. But this document provides, and this happens to be a particular school district, they've done their own, provides with a structured way to look at instruction. What is it about curriculum? Is the pacing too fast, etc.? What is it about the environment? And what is it about the learner that might give us insight into ways to improve instruction? So given our time, I would like to just hit a summary. We started off today talking about the necessity for a growth mindset. Throughout our time together, we've shown that growth is good, but that growth by itself is not sufficient to close a gap and catch students up. So we identified decision rules for differentiating types of growth: positive, questionable, and poor. We also identified approaches based upon the growth to instructional decision-making. For positive, it's continuing until transition. For questionable, assuming that it was delivered in sufficient time and with integrity. We want to intensify the instruction that is resulting in growth, but not lowering a risk level. That would be a good example for student 1 and 2 in our last example. We talked about ways to a 5-step process to share, communicate, and use data. And then this last thing is an example of a framework that once we have identified the groups or individuals that we're going to improve or change instruction around, a framework for making that decision. So any closing, if I can speak, any closing thoughts that you would like to share in the chat room about today. I am also going to follow up with you on the academic engaged time and outcomes and the positive behavior, the supports during instruction. But please share any thoughts that you have about today that you would like to share to kind of close us out. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Anna. Any other thoughts? Thanks, Kevin. So in respecting your time today, each of you has from the front of the presentation. Thanks, Kirsten. You have my email. If you would like to email me any clarifying questions you have, any requests for additional resources around the topic today, please do email me. I'll respond to you right away. I'm going to send Kelly the 2 additional resources that I just mentioned, and then Kelly or Lauren or Kirsten, any of those can figure out how to get it to you as a follow-up. But I want to thank you again, and I look forward to our last session together coming up. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Dr. Batch. Thank you so much for such a valuable interactive session. And I also wanted to thank all the folks that shared your thoughts and ideas in the chat. And if we could kind of share the screen, we'll get up your code here.